philosophically, it is not a defeater for belief in God if there is naturalistic evolution. The presence of a natural process by which intelligent life came about is not a philosophical defeater for there being a eternal spiritual being who is all good and all powerful. So philosophically, it's actually not a contradiction. Where people really start to run into a little bit of grey area and start to have some lively questions and discussion is around whether the theory of evolution is compatible with the biblical account of creation. Do you have to dismiss Genesis in order to fit in there, or do you have to reread Genesis, through a different understanding that maybe the main agenda of this text is actually not to tell us about the purely physical phenomena of our world, or maybe it's got more scientific or anthropological emphasis. And so then Christians in-house wrestle with this question. So, I'm sure in our churches there are Christians of good, clear conscience who are genuinely trying to uphold the authority and the inerrancy of Scripture and trying to make sense of what do we do with the data from our natural world about how old it is, and maybe the process by which biological life came to now be in this intelligent form of human beings. So then that's a live discussion in-house. So there's philosophical reasons. It doesn't compete with, I don't think it undermines the existence of God at all. It's perfectly possible that God could have used that process if he saw fit. Biblically and theologically, that's where the discussion is, and it's an in-house discussion. You do not need to hold a particular view of creation in order to be a Christian. Christians hold different perspectives. And then the third point is this. I think it's a good thing that we genuinely engage in and weigh up the scientific evidence for any theory that we hold. And that's how science is done. It continually reevaluates and re-examines based on new information that's being presented to us. And I think all of the information that we're eventually getting is showing more and more clearly that life is so much more complex and finely tuned than we ever previously thought, that the idea that you get an intelligent mind from a mindless, unguided process was actually really difficult to sustain philosophically, and also just from observational science, it does not happen in nature, that information comes from random chaos. We also know that the whole cosmology around us now shows that the universe had a beginning. And it's just rules of philosophical logic, and also it can be demonstrated scientifically due to cause and effect, that if the universe began to exist, all things that begin to exist have a cause, and that cause needs to be outside of the universe. So when you put all these things together in a cumulative case, far from science and God being in competition, which I mentioned in my talk, I actually think they complement each other. And when it comes to God and science with regards to evolution, I actually think we need to re-examine how we're reading the Genesis text. Are we taking it so literalistically that the original recipients wouldn't have dealt with it that way, or that the genre of text, we're reading it as moderns and not appreciating that this is a piece of ancient literature, and the author had an intent that I think when we weigh it up in light of all Scripture, we can see that it's primarily a theological text telling us something about God, and it's also telling us something about human beings, and it tells us things about nature, but I don't think the exact process is given in such detail that we're locked into a straitjacket that we can't investigate the scientific evidence for how evolution might have played a part.
Yeah, I think that's a hugely helpful framework that Jordan just laid out, very comprehensive. And so there's not a lot for me to add, but I guess, Jordan asked what would I say as a lawyer. The only sub-point I would make to Jordan's final point really is just on this idea of the qualitative difference between what the creation account is trying to do in Genesis and what scientific theories generally, but specifically the varying scientific theories on evolution are trying to do. The Genesis creation accounts are not trying to, nor do they, explain how the universe was brought into existence. The purpose of the account is to explain why it was brought into existence, what actually happened, and most importantly, who is the agent that sits behind the bringing of the universe into existence. Whereas natural sciences are looking at something completely different. They're looking at how things work and how things happen. So understanding the difference between mechanism and agency, as you know, a former professor of ours, John Lennox, who taught Jordan and I, he breaks this down, this difference between mechanism and agency. Genesis is really about the agent. It's about who brought it into being. The natural sciences are about the mechanism, how they happen. And so I think you can make a very strong argument that there actually is no need for the process of reconciliation any more than there is a need to reconcile the former existence of Steve Jobs with the existence of the iPhone, or to reconcile the operation of the internal combustion engine with the existence of Henry Ford, or to reconcile the existence of Microsoft Windows with the existence of Bill Gates and the Microsoft Corporation. The agent is the person or the entity that brings something into being, and then the mechanism is how we understand how it works. And so Genesis is just trying to tell us what happened and who made it happen and why he made it happen. Science is trying to tell us how it happened. And even sciences, there are varying accounts. There are different kinds of evolution, macroevolution, microevolution. And as Jordan correctly says, different people, Christians and non-Christians, have different views on all of those things. And that's perfectly fine. So let's not get hung up about it. But the most important takeaway was actually Jordan's first line, which is, this is not a deal breaker. It's not a deal breaker for the truth value of the Bible, and certainly not a deal breaker for the truth and the power of the gospel.